Welcome to a Cristie software video tutorial presenting Cristie's TBMR for Linux, bare machine recovery for TSM. In this video tutorial we're going to be showing how to install TBMR onto your Linux box, how to run your TSM backups, and then how to perform a recovery to a newly created virtual machine. Today's tutorial starts with a CentOS 5.5 64-bit machine, onto which I've already installed the TSM 6.3.00 TSM client. I've pre-configured my TSM client to back up to a node on my TSM server, and I can show you the options file that I've already created. As we can see, the node that I've created on my TSM server is called TBMR-Linux. And you will also notice another option in there for virtual mount point /dev. This is so that when we run the TSM incremental backups, the device nodes on the system are backed up, as by default TSM does not back up the /dev device nodes. Once we've added virtual mount point /dev to our options file, created our node on TSM, we can now move to installing TBMR. I've already mounted the TBMR installation CD to my virtual machine. Once I change directory to my installation CD, I can see that we have a tar.gz and an RPM file for installing the product however way you wish. Today I will show you installing from the RPM package. As we can see, once TBMR is installed, it self-licenses itself for 30 days. The 30-day trial is built in. And once the installation is complete, we can see the TBMR CFG program running for the first time. So upon installation, TBMR automatically creates its default configuration in a /TBMR CFG folder, which we can see here. And there are the TBMR configuration files. The TBMR CFG program should be run periodically, so you can schedule the TBMR CFG program to run either using cron or create a separate TSM schedule, or you can use the pre-schedule CMD command in your DSM sys to run TBMR CFG every time a TSM incremental backup is run. So once we've installed TBMR and the TBMR configuration has been created, we just need to make sure that the virtual mount point for /dev is added to our DSM sys file. And once that's done, we can run our TSM incremental backup. We can run an incremental backup of the system. And there we will see that TSM is backing up the local /file system, /boot, and as we've added the virtual mount point for /dev, it's also backing up /dev. And now we can see that our TSM incremental backup is completed. So the process for using TBMR to protect a machine is to first make sure you add the virtual mount point for /dev to your DSM sys file. You then install the TBMR program and make sure that the TBMR CFG configuration is captured. You then run your TSM incremental backup of the system, and once you've done those items, you are then ready to perform a recovery. So now I will start by turning off this virtual machine, moving to my recovery machine. As we can see, I've created a new virtual machine to recover to and already attached the TBMR for Linux bootable ISO to it. So now when I power on this machine, I can boot into the TBMR for Linux recovery environment. The options we have on booting into the recovery environment are a X-based Windows recovery environment, or a text-based Linux recovery environment, or we can just boot from the local hard disk. Obviously at the moment our hard disks are blank, so I'll boot into the X-Windows based Linux recovery environment. We've customized our own Linux kernel that will boot the recovery system for us. Our custom Linux kernel will load its own drivers for the virtual hardware. And TBMR will automatically obtain a DHCP address for ETH0 on boot. So if you're using ETH0 and you have DHCP available on your network, the networking in the recovery environment will automatically be configured for you. Once booted into the recovery environment, click Accept on the license agreement, and then we're presented with the familiar TBMR recovery console that we've made and designed to look like the Windows recovery console. So to begin a recovery using TBMR, we first start with a beginning option, start with automatic recovery. Then we need to input our TSM details, And if you haven't already configured the network or you're not using ETH0 and DHCP, we can click on Network Setup here and then select our Ethernet interface from the drop-down list, as well as seeing the MAC address for that interface and its connected status. As we've already got DHCP configured, I can continue to put in my TSM server details. So the IP address of the TSM server, the node name that I'm going to be recovering from, and the password for that node. If you didn't know which node you wanted to recover from, you can put in the TSM administrator details here and then click on Browse and then browse for the node on the TSM server that you wish to recover. However, I know my node information, so I'm going to plug that straight in. Once I click on Next, I can enter in any DSMC options such as point-in-time restore, and then clicking on Next again, TBMR will now use DSMC in the background to access the node information that I've put in there. It will recover this configuration information that we created using the TBMR CFG program that's recorded in our backup. Once that information has then been pulled back, we can click on Next and we'll see the recovery options screen. We can select whether to use dissimilar hardware here. So if I'm recovering to a different machine than the original, I can select to use the dissimilar hardware tools to inject new drivers into this recovery machine after the recovery is finished. I can select more verbose logging if we're having any problems for the recoveries, or I can use recovery options. Clicking on recovery options will show us the disk layout of both the original machine and the new machine that we're recovering to. We have full control over the disk ordering in the new machine. If I wish to switch these around, it's a simple drag and drop. If I'm not sure which volume groups are on which disks in the original machine, I can click on the original disk and it will show me the partition types for my disk. My original partition 1 was a Linux volume of this particular size, and my partition 2 was a logical volume, and I only have one volume group of vol00. Should I wish to select particular file systems or volume groups for recovery, these can be unticked here. And you see if I untick this particular disk, all of the volume groups and file systems associated with that disk are unticked. If I were to tick this disk again, and this volume group, I have complete control over what's going to be recovered. We click OK and you get a confirmation screen of what you've decided to be recovered. And then we can proceed with the recovery process. So once we click on Next, TBMR will now use the configuration information and choices you've made for recovery options to partition and format the disks, create your logical volumes and volume groups, mount the file systems, and then begin the file-by-file recovery direct from your TSM backups. So we can see on the screen TBMR creating the file system, mounting the volume groups and logical volumes, and then beginning the file recovery direct from TSM. And there we see the TSM file recovery has begun. And there we have confirmation of our successful TBMR recovery. We always get the message to remind us to copy the log files just in case there were any problems. And I would stress the importance of copying the log files after a recovery just in case they're needed for support purposes. To copy the log files, you can click on the GUI menu option to copy the log files to a network location or removable media. Clicking Browse to find your location, and if it's on a network share, which I'd recommend you do copy it to a network share, click on the Mount Network Share, type in the share information with a username and password to access that share. We have confirmation that my share has been mounted to a local place on the recovery environment. Then I can browse the folders on my share and select to copy the log files to my network location. As we can see with the message at the bottom, our log files have not only been copied, but they've been put into a handy TGZ file, so they're all zipped up, ready for you to email across to our support team for investigation should any problems happen. And as I say, I would recommend that you really copy the log files just in case they are needed. But once we've had a successful recovery, we can reboot the recovery console and boot into the recovered OS for the first time. It's worth noting that upon first boot, if you were using SE Linux on the original system, then the file systems will be relabeled, as this is necessary. It may take a little bit of time and it will require an extra reboot, but once the file system relabel is done, we can then boot into the recovered OS. So now the file system relabel has been performed, we're on to the last boot, which will boot us into the recovered OS. And now we have a recovered system. We can log in for the first time to confirm the system is working. And there we have it, a completely recovered system. And that concludes the Cristie software video tutorial on using TBMR for Linux to recover to a virtual machine.